Tell me more about how your practice was accepted or not accepted in this community.
So yeah, that's an interesting story, and I'll try and give you the short version. But I was working for a surgeon in Plymouth, and they had had a physician who died and a physician who retired, and they were already short of providers to begin with, and it's a college town. So a female was a real strong need for that community, especially someone with a family nurse practitioner like myself who could do GYN and liked doing GYN. So working for a surgeon meant that we weren't head-to-head with competition. Unlike a family nurse practitioner working with a family doc, you're competing for patients. But I basically ran his office. I was the office manager. He was in the ER. He was in the OR. I did some of his pre-op work, his post-op work. I saw my patients, and it worked well. I had a profit sharing set up with him, and I was very happy and would have stayed there. Except at one point, he came up to me and said, "You know what? My wife, my accountant, and I think you're making enough money for a nurse. So don't count on any raises this year." I was making a fraction of what he was making, and I knew it, and I knew what I was generating for revenue. And that just astounded me. So I went home and I was really upset. What am I going to do? And then I said to myself, you know what? I'm doing this for him. Why don't I do it for myself? Why can't I do this for myself? So I wanted to open a family practice in Laconia, but realized that if I opened a family practice, I was going to have the family practice doctors, the internists, the pediatricians, the OBGYNs. Nobody wanted me to do this, and they were all going to be forces I was going to have to contend with. So I made a political decision to open up a women's health center, but I made it primary care for women, and nobody was doing that at the time, and nobody even really knew what that was. So I was doing pretty much infants through the elderly, and opened the Women's Health Center, and really the only people who were the most upset were the OBGYNs, and frankly, they were overworked and were exhausted from staying up doing deliveries and pretty much left me alone, and so did everybody else. Initially, the hospital wouldn't give me privileges to order lab or x-ray, so what I did was I found out who their reference lab was, and I started to keep a record of all of the labs that I had ordered, and they said, if you draw your own blood, you spin it, we have to come up every day to the hospital anyways, we'll take it. So after 6 months, I called the CEO of the hospital and said, do you want to see how much revenue you're losing because I'm sending this business out of town? So I met with him, and he said, yeah, I'd like to see it. We met, and within, I think, 2 weeks, I had outpatient privileges at the hospital. Lab, x-ray, ultrasound. So that changed it. And that's when I really learned it was all about following the money. It wasn't about whether you were qualified. It wasn't what your education was. It was about the money.
Money. And at some point along the way, you were interviewed by 60 Minutes.
I was by Morley Safer.
And that happened when?
Oh, 1997.
And why did he interview you?
So it wasn't just me on the interview. It was several nurse practitioners, but they were looking at the role because there was so much pushback from physicians. And they had the president of the American Academy of Family Physicians basically say that a nurse practitioner didn't know the difference between a strep throat and somebody that had leukemia. And they had a couple of other nurse practitioners who were working in rural settings, but nobody that owned their own practice. And at that point, there were almost no states that had full practice authority and had nurse practitioners who were also getting direct reimbursement from insurance companies. So I'm not sure how they found me. I remember now, Jan Tower, the American Academy of Nurse Practitioners, someone had contacted her, and Jan said, you want to talk to Nancy DeRubo. And so he had summered at Squam Lake with his family.
Wow.
So he wanted to come to New Hampshire. Of course, they were in New York, and they came and did the interview. And I do remember being extremely nervous and trying to explain the role. We spent so much time and energy trying to explain to people what's a nurse practitioner that we don't have to do now because everybody knows that. But the tagline I tried to give him was, you don't need an astronaut to fly an airplane. A pilot will do just fine. And there's nothing wrong with a pilot. A pilot has a different set of skills than an astronaut does. And so trying to give somebody something very concrete, and he really liked that. And the funny part about it is my brother-in-law is an astronaut, so it was kind of an inside family joke as well. So, yeah.
And I can remember seeing this interview, like the YouTube version of it running at probably one of the annual conferences that I went to. but I don't know that I've ever sat and watched it. Is it possible to find it
It
anymore?
is, I think it's still on YouTube, yeah.
Really?
I think it is, yeah.
Okay. So, what spurred you to go on?
My patients. I developed a model of healthcare that I think was different. I clearly embraced being a nurse and see that as my primary role. I believe that nursing is an art and a science. And the science of nursing is diagnosis, it's medications, it's pharmacology. The art of nursing is not only the compassion that we bring, the time that we bring, the emotional support that we bring, but it's also the fact that not everything is evidence-based. We don't have research to guide us. And that we're not going to cure everything. What we need to do is to be compassionate with everyone and help them on their journey. And that journey is theirs, and our job is to assist them on that journey. And sometimes it involves a lot of creativity. And it also involves taking as much as you can from science and making it work for the individual. And it was always my patients that said, I love this, I can sit, I can talk to you, you're available by phone, you look me in the face. I had patients that I've been taking care of for over 30 years. And the communication and the value of that long-term relationship is lost today. And patients know the value of it. It's very hard to measure that, but the kind of emotional support, the relationship that you develop, when somebody calls me and says I have chest pain, and I've known them for years, it's easier for me to assess and to put it into perspective. When someone's going through a life crisis, I can offer so much more valuable emotional support to someone who truly knows me, and I truly know them. And I've been blessed to be able to be at people during their births, when their grandchildren were born. I've held their hands when their husbands have died. I've been all through the journey. I've given bad news more times than I wish I ever had. But the kind of model that I had was what I call love and kisses. And love stands for low overhead and volume, and keep it super simple. So I didn't have a medical assistant. I didn't have a nurse. I didn't have a huge staff. So they just saw me. I had one exam room. I didn't have 3 rooms going. I didn't have to beat the clock. They got a lot of time and attention from me. I had very long-term relationships. Many of the patients followed me from Plymouth, and I had taken care of them for 30 plus years. I feel very strongly that patients value the kind of care that nurse practitioners give. And I could make as much money, make the kind of living that I wanted to make. It was about a lifestyle choice for me. It's hard work to have your own practice. It's very long hours. But the satisfaction that I have at the end of the day and the reaction that I had to patients when I stopped practicing in primary care told me that I was on the right track. They were supportive to me as I think I was to them in a lot of ways. And maybe a lot of them didn't even realize that at times, because it was a very difficult time in the early days to be a nurse practitioner.
Right.
Interestingly enough, the most support that I got in New Hampshire was from the business community. When I first moved to this town, I wanted to set up meetings with important nursing people that I thought. I tried to make a lunch meeting with the director of nurses at the hospital, and her reply was, I don't see any need for us to get together. And yet the Chamber of Commerce embraced me. Businessmen wanted to mentor me and help me out along the way, and were very excited that I was doing what I was doing. So it wasn't the medical community, and frankly, for a long time, it was not the nursing community either. But the business community was very supportive.